Welcome to All Games New and Old. I'm David Rodriguez, and today I'm going to be reviewing Vampire the Masquerade Rivals. This game was published in 2021 by Renegade Game Studios and was designed by Matt Hyra. Now, I'm a big fan of the Vampire the Masquerade setting, and actually I'm a really big fan of vampires in general, especially as they're portrayed in more modern times when they're not sparkling, of course. They're mysterious, they're dangerous, they're conniving. I really love them, which is why I'm super excited about the guest I brought in today to talk about the theme. So I'm going to go ahead and send it over to him. I'm really excited, guys. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you for inviting me to talk about your game. You know, it used to be I could not appear on any sort of videotape production. Because the old cameras, they always used mirrors. I used to take it personally, but then I realized it was no reflection on me. I was just having a little fun with you. But tell me, David, do you have children? Yeah, actually, I do have kids. I'm not sure I should be telling a vampire that, but yeah, I do. What about you? Ah, yes. Me too, actually. I see the daughter all the time, but it has been a long time since I saw the son. Okay, but seriously. Knock knock. No, okay, no, we're not doing that. Okay, I'll handle this on my own. So, Vampire the Masquerade. If you were a fan of role-playing games in 1991 or anywhere along those early 90s, you couldn't have really missed Vampire the Masquerade being out there. It was really different because it went away from the typical fantasy and sci-fi that we saw in most RPGs and brought it to a modern time where you were sort of the bad guys. You played as vampires of various different clans that had different preferences and abilities. And it wasn't all about going and fighting some big bad creature necessarily, although it could have been that. It also had a lot of political intrigue. Your characters were trying to one-up other vampires in the city, become more prominent and more important in the city that they're in. And I really, really thought that was a great setting. I mean, for one, it spoke to the inner wannabe goth in me. I couldn't really pull off the goth thing, to be honest, but I liked the idea of it. And this game really hit that hard. I mean, it was so neat to go and pretend to be this really probably sociopathic evil monster, but you're working with other people to deal with other sociopathic evil monsters, and it was just so different. You know, in D&D you'd go and you'd have to fight some monster or some evil wizard or what have you, and this one just wasn't structured like that. You certainly could have those big fights, but yeah, it really was different, and getting your mindset into the idea that you had to do political maneuvering instead of just beating something down was, for me at least, really different at the time. I know the setting became hugely popular. There were people who dressed like vampires all the time because of it, and it stayed strong for a really long time. I kind of fell away from it for a while. I know at some point they changed the setting of the world to sort of did a reboot of it. And I was so in love with what had been previous that I didn't really even bother to look into it too much. But recently, there's been a lot of games that have come out in this setting, and I mean really recently. I don't recall all their names. There's a Legacy one that came out. There's another one that's sort of like an area control game. But this is the one that excited me the most because it is what Renegade Games is calling an expandable card game, which is sort of like Fantasy Flight's living card game systems. And so what that means is you get certain cards in this box, and then as you buy expansions, you'll know what's in those expansions. It's not a booster pack, it's not a secret, and you can adjust your decks however you want. You know, you can remove things, add things, mixing things up in whatever way you want to hopefully get you some victories. So I thought that was a really neat idea for this kind of game. And I kickstarted it, and I was really hoping that it would capture the feel and the theme of the games a lot. And I was hoping that it would play in a fun and interesting way. So what I'll do is I'm going to take you to a little overview of the game. It is a pretty complicated game in some ways, so I'm not going to hit on every single rule out there. There's a ton. I'll try to hit as much as I can so you get at least a basic gist of how it goes, and then I'll come back with my final thoughts. So let's go to the gameplay. All right, so I've set this up as a 3-player game using the starting decks that come in the main set. So I've got my 3 different players here. Now this is much more cramped than you'd actually play it. I'm trying to get everything on the screen to show you. Usually to give yourself a lot more space. And you'll see why as I try to add cards as I sort of show how this works. So every player has their faction deck, which is the red-backed deck, and those are all going to be the vampires that you could possibly recruit during the game. They also have their library, which has actions you can play, as well as schemes, conspiracies, and things to boost your attack and defense, which I'll try to show you as well. Everyone starts out with 20 points in prestige. That's what these little markers are at the blue side. When you first pull out your first vampire, though, you have to flip it over. On the other side is a blood token, and it'll have the value in blood. So you basically have to pay for that first vampire right away. You flip those over and you put the amount of blood that he's supposed to have, which is indicated on the top corner of his card. So that first vampire you have out is your leader and will be your leader through the whole game. If your leader dies, you don't get a new leader. You just don't have the leadership ability that that your Haven, which is this card here, gives you. So every player is going to have a different Haven, and they will give you different abilities. So for instance, this leader's ability, when he's attacking someone, he can discard 1 card, and then the leader deals +1 damage to the target. And the different Havens offer different things. Every player will also have their agenda card, which will give them a specific way that they're going to win. Everybody can win if they get 13 agenda points, which are what these tokens are here. So first person to 13 wins. You can also win if you take out your specific rival, and that can be done either by doing enough damage to all the vampires that they're all basically not active anymore, or if you cause them to run out of all their prestige, in which case they're also they're so unimportant now in the city that they're basically gone. The other possibility is if someone else kills your rival, then if it's your rival they killed, you will get 3 agenda points. The game will basically stop, and everyone will count up their agenda points, and whoever has the most at that point wins. So those are the ways that you can get the agenda points, but your agenda card will have some other things. So for instance, this one, when he defeats a character with 5 or more blood potency, again, that's sort of their maximum hit points, they'll gain an agenda point that way as well. And this one also lets him get an agenda point when he defeats a non-rival character. Usually, you only get the agenda points if you defeat a character of one of your rivals. So let me show you how the rival thing works, because this is really interesting. When you start the game, you're going to pull out these little tokens here. They can be numbered up through 4. You just pull out however many you have for the play. And the first player is going to shuffle those around and pick one at random. So they're going to pull this one. So they picked 2. So as he's player 1, we go clockwise. So that means that player 2, this person, is player 1's rival. Then player 2 is going to shuffle these around, pick one, and player 3 is player 2's rival. That means that player 1 is player 3's rival. So again, you want to be taking out the vampires of your rival to get more agenda points. You can certainly fight the other vampires as well, but you get a lot more benefit fighting against your specific rival or targeting your specific rival in different ways. So I'm going to go ahead. I have everything set out already. You'll have these city cards, which come from the city deck. And usually start the game with 1 per each player. So in this case, I have 3 out. I'm going to proceed through a turn as if the first player hadn't just done this, because usually the first player does this and then they go on with their turn normally. But just so I can show you how some things work, I'm going to play the first player turn as if it wasn't actually the first turn, so those things would already be out. So we have our first player here. His name is Hydra. He's a Bruja vampire. When you start the game, you have 4 cards from your library. If you're the first player, you have 1 card from your faction deck. Everyone else will have 2 cards from their faction deck. Okay, so I'm going to go through the first player's turn in this case, pretending that we're a little further into the game, so the game would already be set up. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to do the city part of the beginning phase, in which case you're going to draw the top card of the city deck, and put it out into the city. In this case, it's an event, so you'd resolve that right away. So this one will say each player may discard up to 2 cards. For each discard, they gain 1 prestige. So that's really good because prestige is it's hard to replace. There's not a lot of ways to replace in the game. So since that was an ongoing event, or since that was an instant event, we're going to put that out to the side. So that part's done. If any of the vampires had been exhausted, which is what you have to do to use an action or attack, we would then ready them. If they're out in the streets, which is the central part of the board, they would come back into the haven, which is going to be next to these cards here, and they're pretty much ready for action again. Then we go to the action phase, which you have 2 actions that you can do, but there's several possibilities. You could draw 1 card, which is what they call an unhosted action, which means you don't have to exhaust a vampire to do it. And you could draw one from either the library or the faction deck, whatever you prefer. You could recruit a vampire. That is also an unhosted action. And especially early on, you want to recruit a vampire as soon as you can, because if someone were to knock out your 1 vampire right away, then the game is over and probably you've lost. So I'll show you how to do that because he does have one in his hand. It's this one here named Brother, and he has a blood potency of 5. So what I would do is I would put him down, and we're going to say this is next to him just because I can't fit it in, and we would have to fill up his blood. So I would have to take from my prestige, flip those over to the blood side, and give him 5 blood. And he's ready to play immediately. As soon as he's there and filled up, he's ready to play. So I could have done that as an action. You can claim the Prince of the City title if that is out on the board. Right now it is, and that's kind of an unusual one. There's a lot of different titles in the game, and basically when you gain them, you would attach them to your character and just have the text with the benefits it gives you sticking out from beneath it. The Prince of the City one is a little different than most. You don't just simply pay a cost to get it. That one, I would go out. I would say he's going to claim that. And then everyone around the table would basically get a chance to attack him. And if he survives all those attacks, then he gets the Prince of the City title. If he doesn't, then the title goes back out to the city to be claimed. If he did win the title, then for the rest of the game, anyone who defeats the Prince of the City then becomes the Prince of the City. And that title just gives you some pretty nice benefits. You get a prestige and an agenda each turn, which is really, really good. So that's a special action you could do. You could play an action card. So if you have them in your hand, like for instance, he has this Smoke Them Out card. If you wanted to play that, you would have to, because it's not an unhosted action, you would have to tap one of your active vampires, or I should say exhaust one of your active vampires, and then you would play it and do whatever the text on the card says. The other thing you could do is you could make an attack. So when you're playing the game, you move your vampires to the streets, which does not count as an action. You can do that freely. You can't move them back to the haven freely unless you have a card that says that you can. But he can then attack someone else in the streets. So for instance, if Lizu Chen from this group was over here, he could attack her if he wanted to. He can attack them in their haven. It's just very slightly more complicated, and I'll tell you how that goes. But basically what he would do is he would decide if he's going to attack her using a physical, which is this stat here, a social, or a mental attack. So the number underneath it is just sort of like definite damage they're going to put out in that sort of attack. Then, so let's say he was going to do a physical attack. He could look through his cards and find an attack card that matches that attribute, so it'd be a physical, and he could play that face down after saying he's going to attack. Now Lizu, she could then either just take that damage, or she could look through her hand and see if she has a card that says reaction that is also physical, which she does. So she could play that face down, and that might take some of the damage away. It could hurt him back. So once they've placed their cards down, the attacker is going to show his first, and then the defender is going to show theirs. He's going to figure out how much damage he would output. She's going to figure out how much damage she would block. So since it's a physical attack and she has a 1 physical, that would take 1 away. So she basically has 1 defense built in against that as well. And then her reaction actually does 1 damage back to him. So there's all kinds of ways that that could go. There's various defensive abilities or things that do all sorts of wacky things. So that's the basics of how a fight goes. There's more complicated things. So if you have multiple vampires out in the city, you can actually create a party out of them. And you just basically stick them next to each other and let people know that they are a party. And what that does is you don't usually have multiple vampires actually all making attack moves on the same person when you do that. But they can sometimes help each other out, either lending some extra damage or a skill or ability. So that's something you could do. And then any vampire that's in your haven, all of them, if you have multiples, are considered to be all in the same party. Now, if he had wanted to attack her in her haven, he could have done so. All the havens have a level of secrecy. The ones in the starter decks are all +1 secrecy. And to get past that, you need to get intel. And the way you do that is actually really simple. For every point of intel you need, you just discard one of your cards. And then he would be able to attack her as usual, but he'd have to keep in mind that any other vampires she has in her haven are part of her party, so they might be able to help her out. Let me pull these back here. There are also ranged attacks, which are a little less common in the game, and they don't add an attribute because nobody has a ranged attribute specifically. But you can't have, because one of the things when you have a party is somebody else in your party could jump in front of an attack that's coming in on you to block it, but they can't block a ranged attack unless their card specifically says they could. So that one's a little different. But, you know, the different attacks can do different things. Usually they do some kind of damage, but some will have other effects. They might cost you prestige or other factors as well. So that's the basics of how the attacks go. Then the end phase, you have the torpor and mending phase. So when a vampire gets defeated, let's say that brother here had been defeated, and let's say we'd moved him down, he would be sideways because he would be basically not active. And as soon as someone goes into torpor, so if he'd been just defeated, I would take one, after returning those blood to the supply, I would take one of the prestige tokens from my supply, and I'm going to make change for this, so I would have two, but I would take that, turn that over, and put that on him. So now, at the end phase of each of my turns, I can basically add one more blood to him, this time from the general supply, but still of my color, until he's all filled up on health back up to his maximum, and then he could come right back out and be active once again. You could also, at this time, mend any of your vampires that are hurt. Each one you can mend one time. You do that simply by discarding one of your cards, and when you discard a card, you can heal 1 damage on a vampire. You could do that to each of your vampires, but you can only heal each vampire 1 time. Then you have the Special Affairs Division action, or the SAD action, which if you have these guys out on the board at the end of your turn, they're going to do 1 aggravated damage to a character that you have under your control. So those can actually stack, so they can actually hit people in your haven because they have 1 intel right away. If you have a stronger haven, these actually start stacking. So if you get another one out, then they have 2 intel, so they can actually still get to your vampires in your haven pretty well. And the aggravated damage, that's something I didn't talk about. So if damage that takes out one of your vampires or knocks them out, if any part of that amount of damage that comes in on you is aggravated damage, then that actually destroys that vampire. So aggravated damage is kind of nasty. With the Special Affairs Division cards, you can kind of control who it goes to, so it's not too huge an issue, but yeah, it's it can be kind of nasty, and it can add up real quick if those guys keep popping out. Another thing you can do on your turn, I didn't really say this because I was talking about attacking other vampires, but you could attack a mortal in the city. For instance, this is a tour guide, and you would attack her just like you would a vampire, except for you don't have to play a card face down. You can play it face up if you want to. She takes 3 to defeat, and you have to kill off or defeat a mortal all in one go. You can't take off 1 blood point now and then do more the next turn. It all has to be done in one shot. Then when you defeat her or other mortal retainers, you may gain some agenda points if it says so on their card. And then if you just discard her, you can mend a certain amount of health. So if your vampire is hurt when they go after her, they could heal up that way. Or you can attach her to that vampire, and she'll give you some kind of ability. So in this case, she would give him +1 social attack. So it's pretty good. You can only have up to 3 things attached to any one vampire. That includes your titles. If you have any of these mortals attached to you when you go into torpor, they go away, but if you have a title, that'll stay on you, and that does not go away. So basically you're going to go around the table doing these things until someone gets enough points. There are a couple other interesting cards, like there are scheme cards, which you play face up, and it'll ask a question like, should this character heal 4 blood on one of their vampires? And if you put it out, that means you're saying, yes, I want this to happen. And the people around the table may agree or disagree with that. And then you're basically going to have a sort of blind bid using your influence. So, for instance, your leader starts with 1 influence right away. So if you wanted to use that to help with your vote, that's all face up. Everyone can see that. So you place a no influence token on top of that, which would stay there until her next turn, basically. But that would say that she used up her influence. If you have other cards or other vampires that have influence, you could use that as well. And then you could take some of your prestige tokens. And what I usually do is I grab them all in my hand, and then I secretly take however many I want to spend, because you're basically using that as your influence to add to this this bidding war. And as you go around the table, people can either bid what they want, or they don't have to get involved at all if they don't want to. And whatever side wins the bid, they do have to spend their prestige tokens they put in there. If they lost, then they get to keep them. And of course, then that thing would go off or not. The other kind of unusual card are conspiracy cards, which you would play face down. Let's say that this is one for her. And I would play that face down, and it'll have you put one of your prestige tokens on it right away. And that'll usually have some sort of effect on someone who doesn't contribute to helping that go off. So I could show this card to player 2. I mean, that's not my rival, so that'd be a good idea. I could show the person that card. They could see what it does, and they could realize, well, if they don't contribute, they could be targeted. So they might decide that they also want to put down a prestige token of theirs on there. And then usually the prestige or the conspiracy effect will go off when a certain amount of prestige is on it, or at least it's allowed to then. You could keep going and adding prestige as you like, if there's a reason to keep doing that, until you finally decide to have it go off. And then whatever the negative effect is on the person who didn't contribute occurs. So it's an interesting one, and it really can get people, I don't know, I suppose a little paranoid. So that's kind of a more unusual card, but they're out there as well. And those are the basics. I mean, there's some things I didn't cover because there's really a ton here. And I apologize for the cramped area here. I just don't have a way to get it looking down on this and having more space. So that's the basic gist of it. You go around again until someone has 13 agenda points, or someone defeats their rival, or really if anyone gets totally defeated, or if they lose all the prestige. And then you figure out who won. And that's the basic gameplay. So I will take you now to my final thoughts. All right, I hope that gameplay video is useful to you. In order to talk about my final thoughts, I actually wanted to bring on the person who I played just about every game with, my wife, Hillary.
Hi there. So I started off playing games like, Monopoly and card games like Spades and Hearts, poker, and slowly started playing board games together, but I never really got into the role-playing games, so we played a couple of D&D games, but I never played Vampire the Masquerade. I knew it existed, but that was about it. So going into this game, I didn't really have any background information on it.
I definitely can play a part in this game. I'll talk about that soon. So as far as just some of the aesthetic features of the game, we talked about components earlier. It's not a ton to say.
I think it's all pretty basic, standard card stock. The components are decent.
Yeah, I mean, there's, like I said, I have no complaints. There's nothing overwhelmingly exciting about them. They're good. Oh, you know what? I will say one thing, though. The insert in this game is pretty awesome, and it comes with dividers for cards from different clans and the different kinds of cards in there. It's really nice. It's actually a really useful one. I have another living card game in my collection that really failed at that, despite being a great game. This insert's awesome, and it has plenty of room for future expansions, which there will definitely be plenty of future expansions. So that was really cool. As far as the art goes, I get the feeling that it has multiple artists. I don't think all the cards are from the same person. I think there's at least a little difference in style. That at least that's how it seemed to me. But I really enjoyed the art quite a lot. What did you think about it?
I think the art was really well done. That some of the cards are kind of dark, but it fits in with the theme. It just makes some of the details a little hard to see.
Yeah, definitely. It is definitely not a bright, cheery looking game by any stretch. If you're concerned about it, there's not, I wouldn't say a lot of really graphic pictures. You have vampires that have clearly bitten someone recently and will have blood on their mouths or fingers. You can decide whether or not that bothers you.
Yeah,
but
there's weapons and blood.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of to be expected with a game that's based on vampires, so.
Yeah, there's nothing that looks like a super grisly crime scene, but it's not a vampire game for kids, so, you probably kind of know what you're getting into as far as that goes. So getting into the more in-depth parts of this, we have kind of different viewpoints, I think, on gameplay and theme, or at least we're coming from a different spot to talk about them. So I guess what are some of your thoughts about the theme and the gameplay and how they all work out?
The theme, for me, all I know is it's vampires and it takes place in, modern time. As far as the gameplay goes, I feel like it's kind of has a steep learning curve to it because they made it so ingrained with the role-playing game. There's a lot of verbiage that is completely foreign to me, and so it kind of took me out of the game a little bit because I had to read the word and then translate it into a word that I was familiar with other games that we play, for me to kind of understand the rules better.
Yeah, definitely. As the person who had to learn and teach this game, I didn't have too much problem with the ideas of what torpor was and what your haven was about and what the Prince of the City deal was. But to try to explain that when some of those concepts, or the way they integrate into gameplay, are things that exist in other games, but of course they're not using the vampire vocabulary. So trying to explain that to people, it's like trying to teach a fairly complicated rule system, and on top of that, teach specific vocabulary for that complicated rule system. And you can't avoid trying to teach the vocabulary. You can't say, well, we're just going to call it this because it's on the cards. So to understand what the cards do, you have to know that torpor is where your vampires go when they're knocked out and that sort of thing. I tried to think if there was a way to dodge having to explain all the vocabulary, but I don't think
so. And the rules themselves, the game itself is pretty easy to learn, but each card has its own rule. So that's where it makes it kind of a steep learning curve of how to learn how to play the game, because I felt like every card I had to read and okay, it has this word on it and I don't know what that means compared to, if it just said, something else that's vocabulary that's used in a lot of other games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's true. At its basic, it seems very simple for the most part, but there is a lot that it's like the interactions between the cards, I think, and the vocabulary that they use is where a lot of the complexity comes in. And when we played, we used the starter decks that it has in the game, and I really felt, or I got the notion that when they made those starter decks, it was almost to show you the different rules in the game rather than to really be an optimized deck for a specific clan. Because you had some inconsistency, I guess you could say.
Yeah, so I played the Bruja, and the first time it was just me and him playing, and I got that game. That clan is a very fighting clan, if you're not familiar with the Masquerade. And so the first time we played, I got a lot of cards that helped me fight, and that's what that clan needs to be able to win. The second time we played with two other of our friends, I was getting none of the fighting cards, so I felt like I was really handicapped in what I was able to do in the game.
Yeah, I think I don't think it's a bad idea for them to do that with the starting decks, but if that really was their plan to kind of show how different cards worked to you, I wish they would have explained that a little bit more to let you know that you might want to go on and I mean I guess it maybe is implied because of the type of game it is that you might want to kind of tighten up the decks and make them more to your liking, but if you had wanted to build specifically a Brewhot deck, and you can mix them, by the way, when you make your own decks, but if you wanted to make a specifically Brewhot deck, you could have gotten rid of some of the cards that were less useful to you in a fight, and you could have added more fighting things in there. But as it was, I think it kind of lent itself to maybe having games where you weren't really getting what you needed. And then when we did play 2-player, there are some cards like the various schemes and whatnot that don't make a ton of sense when you're playing a 2-player game. You can use them. It's not that they don't work. It's just like you're not going to be able to convince other people to help you make those things pass as much because it's really like, hey, you're my direct opponent. Do you want to do this thing to help me? I mean, maybe, but I think that'd be another thing. If you were playing a 2-player game, you'd want to tailor your deck really to play that 2-player game and leave out some of the stuff that makes more sense at a higher player count. I guess, I don't know, do you have anything else you want to add as far as the gameplay or the theme?
I think that's basically, for the games that we played, they felt very similar, even though we were played 2 players versus 4 players. But when we did the 4 players, we ended up randomly having the same rivals. So my rival was number 3, and I was his rival, and Dave had rival number 4, and 4 had Dave. So it kind of made it so it felt very similar to a 2-player game.
Yeah, it was like we had our enemy across the board, and we were just enemies with each other, and I wouldn't say there's no reason to interact with the other people. There certainly could have been, but it was, I don't know, it was really much more focused on almost having 2 separate groups that were clashing, and maybe every once in a while they could try to get someone else to do something for them. But it was sort of an unusual thing when it was just, 2 sets of rivals against each other instead of having it be a little bit more scattered, I guess you could say. So that was kind of different. I will say, though, as someone who is a fan of the Vampire the Masquerade role-playing game, if someone came to me and asked, what do you want in a Vampire the Masquerade game that we're making, I think it hits pretty much everything. I think it captures it perfectly, where you have some combat, but there's also ways you can conspire against people. I don't know that they could have done a better job invoking that theme. Did you feel, not having come from any knowledge of that theme, did you feel like it immersed you in that world? Did you feel like it kind of made you understand it when you were playing? Or
I didn't get much of a understanding of the world from playing the game, and I think because they tried to make it a little bit, they almost made it too immersive in the world, so it made it so if you weren't aware of that world, it kind of took you out of the game a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, do we want to talk about our final score for the game? All right, why don't you go for it?
So I would give this a very solid 5, probably even a 6, for me personally, and the reason for that is because of how much of a steep learning curve it felt like this game has. I feel like in order to really appreciate and enjoy this game, I would have to play a lot of games to be able to understand all the language and verbiage of it. And I just can't see myself wanting to play that many games to really get into it. It's a game that if somebody comes over and wants to play it, I would play it with them and probably have fun doing it still. It's just, I can't see it being a game that I want to go to all the time and really learn it enough to feel like I really understand the game fully.
Yeah, fair enough. So I really struggled with this one, and some of it is going to be for some of the reasons that actually you just said. I still gave it a pretty high score. I wanted to give this one an 8. And the reason why I say I struggled with it is much the same reason as you. I think this is a game for people who are going to make this almost sort of a lifestyle game for them. You know, they're going to be maybe going to organize play at their game store, or maybe they're going to have a dedicated group of people who really play this game a lot and get super into it. And I think it's awesome for that. And if you're a fan of Vampire the Masquerade, even better. You know, for me, it was like, you know, when I play a game, I always have a movie going on in my head of what it was like or what was happening, and going to this, having not looked at Vampire the Masquerade for so long, it was almost like if Avengers Endgame had come out like 15 years after the previous movie, and like suddenly it's here and you're like, oh, it's great, I'm back there, I'm doing it all again, it's wonderful. So it definitely had that going for me, but it's because it is the kind of game that I think you have to play really a lot and really want to take time fine-tuning your deck and whatnot to play. I wish I could do that. I would love to do that, but because of just our lifestyle right now and
how many games we play,
I feel like there's going to be big stretches between times when I play this, and it's going to be a matter of relearning it rather than fine-tuning things to get even better at it. So that's not the game's fault. That's just how our life is at the moment. You know, maybe one day when the kids are all grown up, if this game is still around, we'll be able to do that. And you know, they're coming out with expansions. I know they have one coming out that has the Tremere vampires and some other clan that I'm actually not too familiar with. And I kind of want to get those just to see them and maybe try those out and just see the difference, because I think it's really exciting how they've integrated the theme into this game. But it's just not a game that I'll probably get to the table very often because of how involved I feel like you need to be in it. So I didn't want to ding the game on that. So I think the 8 score is great if this kind of game does fit into your lifestyle, and especially if you love that theme. I don't know that you could do much better than this. So yeah, I guess those are my final thoughts on that. Anything else you want to add?
I'm good.
All right, fantastic. So if you enjoyed this video, if you found it informative, if you could go ahead and like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Also, make sure you hit that bell icon so you can know whenever I put up a new video. Other than that, I look forward to seeing you all around the table again at All Games New and Old. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye. What's going on? Editing is wonderful. That I can edit things. Alright, I'm just having a little fun, but tell me, dude. Alright, I was just having a little fun, but tell me, dude.